Welcome to the Stathead NFL Draft webinar. My name is Jonah. I'm the product marketing manager for Stathead here at Sports Reference. And I'm very excited to talk to you today. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, there we go. So you should all be seeing the homepage of Pro Football Reference right now. Let me know if you're not. But otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. So I work for Sports Reference. We're the company that does Pro Football Reference, which has all sorts of football statistics, including the history of the entire NFL draft, all the way back to 1936. And in addition to kind of the main pages that you probably are pretty familiar with on Pro Football Reference, we have an advanced set of research tools that we call Stathead. And what these do is make it easier to answer more complex questions than what you can do on the normal site. So if you go to Pro Football Reference, you can go to any player's page, obviously, and you can see information like where they were drafted. So here on Tom Brady's page, we can see what team drafted him, what round he was taken, what pick, and the year he was drafted. And then we could click on the link to this, and we could see every player drafted in the 2000 draft. But what if we wanted to answer more complex questions, like how does Tom Brady stack up to every player who was ever drafted in the 6th round? Or where does he rank among every player the Patriots ever drafted, or every quarterback ever drafted? With Tom Brady, these are pretty obvious questions. But with someone else, it might be a little more difficult to dig up the answer to. So that is what Stathead exists to answer. Among a million other things. So what I'm going to do tonight is just walk you through some of the main things that you would do on Stathead during the draft, before the draft, or after the draft to prepare for it. Whether you're someone who is rooting for a team and in a group chat with your friends and wants to give them your take on the player they just picked, or put it into a historical context of how other players who were at the same position, drafted at a similar spot, went to the same college, how they fared in the NFL. If your team makes a trade and you want to see, well, how does that compare? Or certainly if you're, a dynasty player, we had some fantasy football questions related to dynasty that we'll get into. I know there's some gambling on the draft, so you might find some stuff that's useful in there. And we'll go into as well, like where you can find information about the players themselves, the actual prospects who are going tonight. So we'll do all of that by going to Stathead and then going to the football section. So these are all of the Stathead football tools. And they're all quite powerful. And there are a lot of them that can do kind of draft-related things. But for starters, we're going to go to an obvious one, which is called the Draft Finder. It's over here under Draft Tools, and it's called Draft Finder Tool. And when you click on that, this is where you can answer a bunch of draft related questions. So this is where a lot of the draft specific stuff lives. And you can see on here kind of the default search that's showing up is every first overall pick in chronological order. So this is every player who has ever been drafted with the overall selection. So this year, the Jaguars are picking first overall. So what if we want to say, well, let's see how the Jaguars have fared in the past. How can we see every player who was drafted by the Jaguars? We could do that in here. We could also do that in the season finder. But what if we wanted to see players like, here's a good one. What if we wanted to see every defensive end who's gone first overall? So like, with the draft that's coming up, it's pretty likely that a defensive end is going to go first overall. It seems like there's some question about who it's going to be, which I find kind of interesting. You don't usually see that. So we'll tackle both of those. First, if we wanted to see who the Jags are going to pick first overall, we go to this players filter section that I've been playing with for a while, and we go to draft team. And this is the team that selected the player. It's not necessarily the team, the team that they're like most famous for playing for. They may have never even played for the player if they got traded or cut or whatever, but this is who picked them on draft night. So we'll go to Jaguars and we'll click run results. And then this will give us a list of every player who's ever been drafted in Jaguars history. But what we want to know is who have they taken first overall. So once this is done running, what we'll do is narrow that search down a little bit more. But while we are waiting for the thing to run, I just want to once again welcome all of our newcomers, people who are coming in late. Don't worry, you haven't missed too much, but tonight we're going to go over how you can use Stathead to do research for the draft. And my apologies, it looks like it's running a little slow tonight, but no worries about that. We'll move along and then maybe come back to this one in a little bit. I think it's something maybe on my end with my internet or something. Yeah, sorry, my internet's acting funky, of course, while I'm here live on camera. So in the draft finder, the basic concept is that you can search by any sort of draft setup that you would like. So you can search by team, you can search by the round, by the pick, by the position, by the college, basically whatever you want. There we go, we're back. So we can go to the draft finder, and in this case, we're looking for players who the Jaguars have picked first overall. So we'll do Jaguars draft team, and then pick number 1, and then we'll run this search, and hopefully my internet works. So there we go, the only player they've ever taken first overall, Trevor Lawrence last year. So they're going back-to-back first overall picks. But again, the other thing that's interesting is it looks like they obviously won't be taking a quarterback since they did that last year. It sounds like people think they're going to take a sort of like an edge rusher. So in order to find that, you can go to the position filter, which is right where the draft team filter was. And you'll notice if you click this remove button, you can take ones off and add them on very easily. You can add on as many as you want. So I could even narrow this down to Michigan defensive ends who have gone first overall. But in this case, I'm just going to be looking for kind of D linemen. We include tackles and D linemen just because as we get further back in history, the position, the positional kind of like settings are a little tougher to suss out. So I just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody relevant. So here's every defensive lineman picked first overall. You can see Myles Garrett was the last one to do it. Buck Buchanan was the first. And then you'll notice that there's more than just their draft information. So we have their all pro selections, their Pro Bowl selections, their years as a starter, games played. We have a stat called AV, which is approximate value, which is kind of a football version of like an all-in-one type stat to measure like kind of like WAR, like just how did a player do overall in a season compared to every other player at every other position. So like 20-ish in a season is pretty much where the MVP kind of winds up. So you can see who had the best career by that stat. But you'll also see under the sort by all kinds of different like all kinds of different stats. So in this case, we're looking at defensive linemen, so we'll want to look at sacks. So which first overall pick had the most sacks? We could figure that one out. And as a reminder, along the sacks line, in case you were unaware, sacks are an official NFL stat for defenders starting in 1982. But thanks to some amazing researchers, we actually have sacks all the way back to 1960. They're unofficial. They won't be in the NFL record book, but they are pretty much 99.9% complete based on play-by-play, based on game film, other sorts of research. It's really an incredible data set that helps us put historic players into better context, like Too Tall Jones, who was drafted in 1974 and spent the bulk of his career playing defensive end before we actually had sack totals. So we can see that he should probably have that HOF next to his name because he had 106 sacks. That is that. But we also had some questions, and I'm going to mix them in kind of as we do this, but we got a lot of great questions from you all when you RSVP'd. So I want to try to touch on some of them that you can answer in these different tools. So one of them that we got was how far back in the history of football can you see draft results? You can see them all the way back to 1936, the first year they had a draft. Another great question is that came up is like, when should we expect cornerbacks to go off the board? there's a lot of really good cornerbacks this year. And it's a great question, like, you know, when exactly can we expect them to go off the board? So using this search that I just set up, we'll expand the pick range maybe to 1 through 10, and then we'll change the position to cornerback. And then we'll run that search. And so we can see kind of like how often, how many quarterbacks tend to go in the top 10 in a given year. This year, it sounds like the consensus is there will be 2, which is not uncommon. That happened in both 2020 and 2021. But we can also see how likely it is for someone to go super early. Okuda obviously being the a real early one. He went 3rd overall in 2020. Here's Eric Turner going 2nd overall in 1991. And we could easily resort this by pick number to try to find someone who went 1st overall. But we can also look and see that, like, well, we could look at these early ones and kind of glance at this, but honestly, like, I'm not really interested for this question in what a 1956 cornerback did. No offense to Gary Glick, I'm sure he had a wonderful career, but when I'm trying to figure out, like, how high should we be taking cornerbacks now, I want a little bit more recent of the sample. So I'll turn the year up to about 2010. And let's look and see kind of like how many all pros do we have here? Well, Jalen Ramsey and Patrick Peterson, it worked out pretty well. But how many years as a starter, you know, and especially with some of these higher picks, it looks like it's pretty risky. Certainly like the safeties you see faring pretty well here, like Eric Berry. With the corners, it's more like, you know, Kuda, it doesn't seem like it's worked great. Denzel Ward, it's worked out for. Certainly Jalen Ramsey is one of the best players in football. So kind of glancing at this, I can be like, well, do I really want to take the cornerback in the top 10? Maybe, maybe not. It's kind of an interesting question. So that's the kind of research you can do in the Draft Finder. One other thing you could do that relates to a question that we got. So we got questions about, like, who has more impact, an edge rusher or a wide receiver? So in order to figure that one out, you'd want to run 2 separate searches like I just did. We do one for wide receiver and then one for defensive end. And we just would kind of set which stat we're looking at here. Do we want all pro appearances? Do we want Pro Bowls, just years as a starter, AV, whatever it is? You know, we would figure that out in advance. That's kind of where you as the researcher decide for yourself, like, what am I actually, like, going to determine? What is going to decide for me, like, what is good? Is it the weighted AV? Or do I want to do something simpler? Well, just like years as a starter. It probably depends on whether you're looking for, like, booms, you know, or players who didn't bust is kind of the question. We have options for both between the different stats on there. So you'd run one for wide receiver, one for edge rusher. Look at the 2, maybe take it out to Excel, which I'll show you how to do later, and figure it out in there. And then the same thing with another question we got, which is based on approximate value, AV, over the past 5 seasons, which teams have had the most successful draft picks? So that's a great question that would take a little bit more time. What we'd want to do is pull the last 5 years of draft for every team, just the full drafts, and then kind of take that out and again use whatever metric we decide, whether that's AV or years that they got as a starter, you know, or just sort of like games played. I think probably AV was in the question, so that's what you use there, and just calculate it, just average it out and figure it out. So that's the kind of thing that you can do in the Draft Finder, but that's not the only draft tool that we have. It's just kind of the main one, but there's plenty of other draft stuff that's going to be super relevant on draft night. One is down below this top level. When you scroll to the second level, you'll see this section called Trade Tools, and we have something called the Trade Finder. And we got a lot of questions about trades. One big one was people were wondering, about Baker Mayfield, who seems likely to be traded at some point. It seems like draft night would be a good time to trade him. So we would want to, so if that trade does happen, we'd want to go into the trade finder and try to figure it out. So this is the trade finder. By default, what it's showing us is every trade between 1994, the first year we have trade data, and this year that involved the first overall pick. So you can see here are the 4 times since 1994 that the first overall pick was traded. And it works very similarly to the draft finder. So you can designate a specific pick number, like we did in this search for 1. We could do a round. So if Baker Mayfield gets traded for a 2nd round pick, then we could pull up every 2nd round pick, every trade involving a 2nd round pick. I'll do that search now, but there's going to be a lot of trades. So we might want to get more specific than that. Yeah, you can see there's a lot of these trades here that involve 2nd round picks. So one thing we could do to get more specific is to narrow it down to position. So this is the position of the player of an active, like a player who's in the NFL who's in the trade, as opposed to the draft position, which is the position that the pick itself was used on. So if it was a pick in the trade, right? If Baker Mayfield is traded for a 2nd, Baker is going to be under position, but whatever player the Browns take with the 2nd round pick is under draft position. So I hope that made sense. So in this case, I want to see every quarterback traded for a 2nd round pick since 1994. There do not appear to be any, which I guess probably makes some sense. Quarterbacks are pretty valuable. But you get the idea of what I can do on here. So what about if the Eagles have 2 picks, they have 15 and 18. So what if they trade pick 18? I want to see what kind of value people have gotten for that in the past. So I just set up a pick to look for the 18th overall pick, and you can see every trade. And what you'll see on this screen is the list of kind of all of the component parts of the trade. So like the most recent one was the Steelers sending pick 18, a 5th and a 6th, for Minkah Fitzpatrick, a 4th and a 7th. And then next to that is this column AV, which is the sum of player AV for all the pieces in the trade after the trade occurred. So here we can see the AV that the Dolphins sent to the Steelers, but it's not necessarily with the Steelers, it's just the AV that all of these players have had since that trade happened, and vice versa over here. So here we can see a pretty resounding winner, that the Minkah Fitzpatrick single-handedly makes that trade super worth it for the Steelers. And you can kind of use that to compare and contrast kind of what value you can get. So here's a crazy one from 2009, where it ended up being 267 total AV moving between Jay Cutler, Mike Wallace, and stuff. So kind of looking at this, I can look at this trade and be like, oh, hey, like they traded for pick 18. That's a pretty valuable pick. In the past that's had some really high success, or in the past maybe that's not worked out. You can also narrow it down by team. So if you want to see like if the Cowboys trade their pick and you're like their 1st round pick and you're like, I want to see every time they traded a 1st rounder, you can pull that up very easily. You can also do in the 2 section, if every time the Cowboys traded with another team, like on draft night last year, they traded with the Eagles, 2 division rivals. Seems pretty unusual. That was just the 2nd time that they've traded 1st round picks, the first since 1997, where a 1st round pick was swapped from the Cowboys to the Eagles. So that was a pretty cool bit of history. So that's the trade finder. So that's just kind of what you would use if a player like Baker gets moved and you want to see what kind of value he has. If you're just curious, kind of like what is a trade worth? What is this pick worth? That's one way to look at it. So that's really cool. And then there's one last thing I want to show kind of on a history level before we get into the prospects. And that is that in addition to the draft finder, you can find a lot of draft stats in the what's called the player season finder. So this is going to be useful for two things. One is that if you want to look at things like how a player does once they get in the league, if you want to find comps, this is a really good one to do it. So I guess we are kind of moving into prospects. So if I want to find comps for I want to find a comp for how Alabama wide receivers do. First round Alabama wide receivers. I would go to the season finder, and under the biographical filters, you'll see all these draft options. So I would go to draft round and select first round, and I would go to draft position and select wide receiver, and I would go to draft college and I would select Bama. And then then I would go to the last biographical filter, year of the player's career, and select first if I wanted to see how they did as rookies. Oh, I screwed that up. Oh yeah, and then up here under position, wide receiver there too. So then I'm going to go to receiving yards because I want to see who has the most receiving yards. And there we go. Amari Cooper and Jalen Waddle, both 1,000 yards as Bama receivers as rookies. Julio Jones, Devontae Smith, both very good too. This looks like a really good group. So I would feel pretty good about, taking a player like that. So you can use that to plug in and find different comps. You don't just have to do conference. If you want to see SEC receivers, you don't have to just do college. You can do conference. So if you want to see SEC receivers, how everyone from the conference fared in the first round, you can get up that list. And then the other thing that's really cool is a brand new feature that we've just added to this, which is these search types on the second row. Find most players in a season matching criteria, find most players on a team in a season matching criteria, and find most players in combined seasons matching criteria. You can combine those with this draft information to answer really interesting questions. So one of the questions that we got on the form in advance was about wide receivers. They were saying that the wide receiver market is going crazy right now. There seems to be more receivers getting big contracts than ever before. And there also seem to be teams that need wide receivers that are moving off of them. So we saw Tyreek Hill get traded. We saw Devontae Adams get traded. There's a ton of need at this position around the league right now. So is it possible that this year is going to see the most wide receivers ever? That teams are going to say, if I can get a first round wide receiver, that's going to be extremely valuable in a league where Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams are making over $100 million. I can get a guy locked in at a rookie price for 4 years. And if I'm the Chiefs, I can have Patrick Mahomes throwing to him, and it's going to be great. So will we see the most wide receivers go in the first round? One way to do that, and just generally, our first round wide receivers more valuable. So we can use this, find most players in a season matching criteria, and we can get rookie first round. I'll take off the conference. So we'll just look for wide receivers who were drafted in the first round and played as rookies in that season. So we can see 7 is the mark to beat with Clayton, Evans, Fitzgerald, Jenkins, Williams, and Woods. The only caveat I have with this is you'll just want to check and make sure that there wasn't anyone who was drafted but didn't play in the league. Their rookie year, the season that they were drafted, if they were redshirted for some reason, they wouldn't come up in this search. So you'll just want to double check that. But one other interesting thing about this is that we don't just have to look, we can combine this with their stats in season. So if I want to see not just like, if I don't want to see necessarily what round they were picked, but like, how are these rookie wide receivers going to do? I can look and see, well, what was the year with the most rookie wide receivers who caught 1,000 yards? So I'll run that search, go to the statistical filter, add 1,000 yards. And I can see that 2014, there were 3. In 2021, there were 2. And if I take that down a little bit, I'll be curious to see, what about 500 receiving yard rookies? Again, 2014, and you see 2020 right there with 10. So you can see that, like, and there's 2019. So you can see that while we haven't quite hit the sort of historic high of the 2014 class, that these last couple of years have been really, really fruitful for rookie wide receivers. That wide receivers, perhaps as much as ever, if not more, can jump into the league immediately and make an impact. And as we're on draft night watching the teams make their picks, that's just something to keep in mind. Like, hey, this is probably a good time. We can even throw in, hey, what about first year, first round picks at wide receiver? How many of them made a Pro Bowl? Not necessarily as a rookie, just kind of like ever. And we'll narrow this one down to like 2017. So we can see, run that search. All right, so there are nine wide receivers who were drafted in the first round and made a Pro Bowl. And we could even see like a team that had multiple first round wide receivers get 1,000 yards. We could see, on a season, what year had the most first rounders. We can answer a ton of questions in the player season finder. So use this to find comps. If you kind of have the player's profile, the round, the college, etc., you can use this to find comps. You can also use it to answer these sorts of positional value questions about how the league is structured right now. So that's a really cool tool. But I want to now make sure that we have time to get into the prospects themselves. Player evaluation is, I don't have to tell you, extremely, extremely difficult. And unfortunately, we have yet to come up with the stat that tells you who is going to be an all-star and who is going to be a flop. But we do have ways for you to explore and make those sorts of determinations for yourself. So the two things that you're going to be able to find on a reference site are obviously player stats, which we will get to in a moment for the college players, but you'll also be able to see their combine data. We have combine stats going all the way back to 2000. And we have all of the combine events. So you can see their 40 time, you can see vertical jump, bench reps, 3-cone, shuttle, all of these things are going to be in there. And you can sort them in whatever order you want. You can also sort for well, I'll do the results first, and we can look at measurables. So like one thing that is just I'll just do to just show it is we can look at the quickest 40-yard dash. So I go to sort by 40-yard dash. We want it to go from the lowest number to the highest number. So I changed that from descending to ascending. And we can see here the fastest 40 times in history. Hey, look at that. Keelan Barnes is someone who is in this year's draft and who has the fastest time ever recorded since 2000 for a cornerback. The third fastest time since 2000 recorded for any player. So we've got, just a fun speedster to keep an eye out for as you're watching the draft. I think he's probably not going to go until the later rounds. But you could, in theory, use kind of like these combination filters. So you could be like, all right, I want to see who ran a 4.5 40 and had at least 20 bench reps. I'll go to 4.4. We'll see if anyone actually managed to do both of those things this year. And nope, no one did it. I'll maybe bump this up a little bit, take this down a little bit, and see. So there we go. So these are the power speed players. These are the two players with a 40 under 4.5 and at least 15 bench reps. So if your team happens to take one of them, that would be an interesting fun fact to share in the group chat. To get yourself excited for the prospect. I think Brisker is a pretty solid prospect. The name definitely looks familiar. I think maybe like a second or third round guy. But in addition to the results, you can also do measurables like height and weight. So if you're curious to see prospects within a certain height range, within a certain weight range, All of that is going to be in there too. And then you can filter by position. So if you only care, if you're looking at 40 times and you only want to see wide receivers, you don't want that speedy cornerback in there, you can filter it by position and all of that. But that's just a good thing to keep in mind that you can see. And then if you go to their player page, which is already up on Pro Football Reference, you can see their measurements on there too. So if you just go to the search bar on PFR, type in the name of the guy your team drafts, you can get his combine measurements quickly, and then use the combine finder to see how he compared to other people in this year's class or historically. You could put in those numbers and build like multi-year kind of comps. So like I'll stay on Brisker and include like kind of safeties, and yeah, I'll go like height. So he's like 6'1", so I'll go like 6 foot to 6'2", and he's 199, so I'll do like 195 to 205, and we'll see what kind of like similar players we can get here. All right, so that's a pretty big list. I probably want to narrow this down maybe a little bit more to get the exact measurables, maybe include some of the other stuff that we've got in here. Oh, it's because I didn't include the 40 time. I'll do that. Whatever, I've come this far. We deserve to see Brisker's comps. All right, so that's hey, not bad. One Thornhill showing up there, Rasheed Mathis with the 81 AV. And we can see all those players, all the players with similar measurables were drafted. Michael Huff went very high. Mostly we're looking at kind of second, third round type picks. But obviously the combine measurables are just one piece of player evaluation. Another piece is film, which we don't have on the site. But obviously that is a big tool that NFL teams use. And then the other thing is stats. So we got a ton of questions about what stats should we be looking at to determine who is a good prospect. So to do that, we actually have a college football site called College Football Reference. And we link to it on a few different pages on the Stathead and Pro Football Reference. You could see in the Combine Finder, there's a link off that says college site that takes you to that player's college football reference page where you can see his stats. You can also get to it on his Pro Football Reference page if you hover. If you go up to here, it'll say college and then college stats, and then that'll take you to the college page. So I'm not gonna lie to you, it's tough. With defenders, we have tackles, sacks, interceptions, forced fumbles, all of that sort of stuff. And so what you're really going to want to do is look very hard, not just at these stats, but at the context of the stats. So it's cool that he had 6 tackles for loss, 2 picks, 63 total tackles in 2021, but we need to know more. So what we'll do is we can go to the team page and we can see very quickly like the team sort of like rankings in the year. So we can see, oh, he was on the 7th best defense. They were the 18th best team overall. And that's despite having the 90th offense. So he was on an elite defense that really carried a team against a top 10 schedule. So this is the kind of like stuff that makes someone, pretty impressive, like blue chip type prospect in terms of that context. But also the other thing to keep in mind is like looking at the team, it's like, oh, was he being carried by other elite players and he just happened to be on this good defense, or was he kind of one of the leaders of the defense? That's really where watching the games is going to be key. But you can see like 5 passes defended is pretty good. I think that he was on a leaderboard for that. You can see kind of where he stacks up in terms of team tackles and tackles for loss. That 6 looks pretty good for a player who plays in the secondary. And yeah, especially combining that profile, 6 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions. That's interesting. I wonder if there's a way I can look up players who did that. So there's no stat head for college football yet. There's going to be one soon. But in the meantime, you can go to the college football reference page and go to the old play index, which is what Stathead basically used to mean. You'll see this note that it's going to be moving to Stathead eventually. But for now, it's still on, all these tools are still there and they're still on your play index. So if you go to player game finder and you go to cumulative season games, that'll basically function as a season finder. So it'll search for combined stat lines over a full season. And I can go in here and I can look up who had 6 tackles for a loss, who had 2 interceptions in a season. And I can even narrow this down by conference if I wanted to go to Big Ten, since he plays for Penn State, and run that search, and we'll get the list of prospects who fit that thing. So we get a lot of comps here. Some of them are going to be really good players. Some of them are going to be total NFL busts. Some of them never made it to begin with. So the key is really starting to, once you've built this list, to start to narrow it down to like players who maybe match more closely. So you'll need to do more research in terms of like I see some players who I know are linebackers coming up in here. I'll need to go to their page to do more investigation on like their position. You can filter by class. Certainly like the games played matters and all of that stuff. So that's one way to look for comps. We also got a question about finding long-term fantasy value, which this is going to be super useful for. So you can dig around here and go and find not just like, so like I'll go to Chris Olave, who I imagine is going to be like a top dynasty pick this year. And you can look at his stats and use the play index to find similar players. So who had 900 yards as a senior in the Big Ten, who had 2,700 yards for their career. With running backs, this is going to be super useful too, because you want to make sure that like the running back has enough experience that they'll be able to go into the NFL and make an immediate difference, but not so much experience that they are too far along in their career, too injury prone, that you're not going to get several good years out of them in a dynasty league. So looking at this stuff, I think is really useful. And then obviously, if you're a dynasty player, I think these searches I was showing in the season finder on Stathead, finding comps by college, finding comps by round, finding rookie performance by first round wide receivers, rookie performance by top 10 wide receivers, all of that stuff is going to be super useful. And you can even, really, really go crazy and get narrow to like, what happens if this team takes this position at this pick, all of that stuff. So let me look at my big list of questions. But I believe that is pretty much everything that I wanted to walk you through, but I know that was a lot. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to please drop them either in the Q&A option or the chat. And there's one that we got from the forum that I'm going to start with right now. While I'm doing that, if you want to go ahead and drop your questions in the chat or the Q&A, please do so. So one question we got on the RSVP form was how to incorporate stats into a blog, a website, a message board, or how to take them off of Stathead so you can do more research with them on your own. The way to do that is very easy. Every table on Stathead has this little arrow next to the query results thing that says export data. You can use this to take the data off of Stathead for your own either further research or to embed it in a blog or to post it on a message board. So if you want to put it in WordPress or on a blog, you would click modify, export, and share table. And when you do that, you'll get this next little menu that shows you has first of all, you'll notice the table has all of these X's. So if you click on the X, it'll eliminate the row or column that has the X. And if you click on this thing, it'll eliminate everything below that. Once you've got the table set up how you like it, you can export it as HTML, which you can then plug into the code on your website. You can also get it formatted for Reddit or a number of other different sort of formatting, wiki if you are editing a wiki. So you can just pick the formatting you need. And then when you click on it, just select all, copy, and paste it into wherever you're trying to paste it. You can also take this and get the table as a CSV. If you click that, it's just gonna, or you can click get as an Excel, it'll turn it into a CSV and you can copy and paste that into your CSV. You can also get it as an Excel workbook and it'll just download it onto your computer. So once you have it on your computer, if you want to do Excel, if you want to do scripts, if you want to do further Excel research, you want to do Python or some kind of coding with it, whatever you want to do, all those options are available for you. Just go to the export data. So that was that question. Now I'm going to take a look at what else we have in here. Okay, I'm glad you asked that question, Topher. So Topher asked quite a few years ago, you used to use included expected AV for each pick on the yearly draft chart. And you were wondering if it was possible. I'm glad you asked that because I remembered that and I was looking for it today and I was like, where did that go? So I would suspect that that is just something that got accidentally moved somewhere in one of our kind of like site updates. But I think that we'll be able to get that back. But I do want to highlight Chase Stewart's site, Football Perspective, which Topher mentioned in the question. He has a draft chart that is based on AV on there as well, a sort of like pick value form, a sort of pick formula trade value chart to let you, it's similar to the famous Jimmy Johnson one, which we have on our website, that lets you decide like, this pick is worth this many points, that pick is worth that many points, so I should do that trade. But I do think that we should be able to get the expected AV back on there at some point. I would definitely like to see that. So that was a great question. Thanks for asking that, Topher, because I was going crazy earlier today trying to find it. So let's see. Are there any other questions in the chat? Let me see. Oh, here's a good one. Yeah. Okay. So someone was asking, this isn't really draft related, but someone was asking how we can utilize Stathead as a fantasy resource. So first of all, we'll do a whole one of these webinars about it in August, kind of during fantasy draft season. But one thing I want to I'll point you to now is the gameplay finder. This lets you see sort of like situational kind of like stats. We have a split finder too, but what I like about this for fantasy purposes is if you want to see who gets the most carries in the red zone or inside the 5 or the most red zone targets, or you know what team gives up the most passing touchdowns inside the red zone, you can do all of that in here. And it's the same basic principle that I've been showing all night. You go to the filter and you select the filter you want. So in this case, in the red zone, and I want play type 2 because I want to see, I'll do passes, why not? And then I want to make sure I'm looking at last season. You click get results and we'll see who had the most red zone targets. We can export that table to Excel and see, yeah, so here, obviously, knowing that Cooper Kupp had the most red zone targets, that's not really going to give you much of an edge in fantasy. Everyone's going to be targeting him. But you can scroll down this list and see some interesting names. And you can also see maybe who didn't score a lot of touchdowns, but had a lot of targets, which is how I look for sleepers, because it's like under the assumption that if they're getting those targets, it's probably just kind of a luck thing. And eventually that will even out for them. So I would take this into Excel. I would do touchdowns, targets, touchdown percentage, all of that sort of thing, and kind of look for sleepers that way. So that's just one quick fantasy tool. And then also, again, those comps that I was showing you, if you have a player who you think might be a sleeper, you could put their year one stats in here in the season finder, and then run get results and see every player who had those stats in their first season. And then you could go to their page and be like, oh, here's what he did in his second season. This seems like a good rookie sleeper. Or again, for dynasty prospects, you could put their draft round, their draft position, their college, all of that stuff, and see how players with a similar profile fared as rookies or fared over their first 3 seasons, or however your dynasty league has the rules set up. So let's see, we did the wide receiver question. Let's see. So how are the advanced stats generated is a question we had. So if you haven't seen them on Pro Football Reference, we have a pretty cool advanced stats section that we have advanced passing stats, advanced rushing stats, receiving stats, and advanced stats for defenders. We have these stats back to 2018. And they will be in Stathead as soon as we have a chance to add them. But these are really cool stats. You can see air yards. You can see stuff like drop rate. You can see pocket time. And as for how these are made, our data provider goes through, tracks every game, and crunches the numbers on this themselves. They have kind of people scoring and watching the game and charting all of this stuff as it's happening. They send it to us and we put it on the site the next day. There was another question about how the site works that I thought was interesting. So someone asked how we add new players into kind of the existing data files. So if there were a third-year John Smith, how would we differentiate him from a rookie with the same name? And that's a great question. If you look in the URL on every player, after it'll be Pro Football Reference /players/B, and then there's this little 8-letter or 8-character code. This is actually the actual like code in the database that belongs to every single player, and that's their unique player ID. So if there were another Tom Brady who gets drafted, he would be Toe Brad 01 perhaps, or they might come up with some other thing. But basically by having those unique player IDs, it enables us to have as many players who share the same name as possible, but keep their stats all differentiated. Although if some of you are real super regular users of the site, you may have noticed from time to time that gets tripped up. Sometimes stats can come through as the wrong player, or stuff like that. So obviously it's something that we have the human element there to make sure of as well. But that's just how we keep it organized. You'll notice for teams, there's similar sort of coding things. So let me look at this question that is in the Q&A. Okay. So let's see. So the first question is about sort of adding, if I'm reading this right, it's about adding sort of IDP fantasy type values to the site. That's an interesting one. We haven't really, I don't know how much we've actually heard like demand for IDP, but I know that that's a very popular format that's growing. And one thing that we're trying to do is add a lot more kind of defensive stats. So when I was on that advanced stats section, I looked at mainly the passing things, but under defense, we've got some really cool, interesting stuff as far as, not just sacks, but like how many times do they blitz? How many times do they pressure the quarterback, hurries, all of that stuff. So in your IDP league, I think that would be good stuff to look for. Probably the same concept as like red zone targets. Like if you see someone is pressuring the quarterback a lot, even if they don't have a lot of sacks, they'll probably get up there eventually. And then as far as historical data on NFL players, like I said, we're constantly trying to find new sources and new information. So the latest sort of big research project like that was sacks, historic sacks were added to the site. So we now have unofficial sack totals for every player since 1960. Even though the official leaderboard only starts in 1982, you can see players from the 60s and 70s, and I believe so you can see them. I think some of the game level data is a little less a little less fleshed out, but on the player level, you can see their sack totals for years well before the league started actually officially tracking that. So that was a really great and exciting research project. We would love to find more of that sort of thing. Obviously, it's just a matter of whether the researchers who spend the time do it. Sometimes people contact us and tell us they have these data sets. For example, we have a lot of historic gambling data. We actually have money line like spread data back to the 70s. Just because someone happened to be tracking that and emailed us and was like, hey, would you like to put this on your website? So we're constantly looking around for sources like that. And anytime we get a data set like that, we love adding it to the site. We love really fleshing that stuff out. So thanks for your question. That was a really good one. And I could do this all night, but we have a long night ahead of us tomorrow and a long weekend because it is draft weekend. So I'm going to go ahead and let everyone go. But I just want to say thanks again for coming out tonight. I hope this was very informative and that you all learned something about how to use Stathead. But obviously, Stathead has a bunch of tools. There's a bunch of stuff I didn't get around to talking about. There's a bunch of stuff that wasn't relevant to the draft, but is going to be super relevant to training camp or to the start of the season or to fantasy. So if you ever have any questions about how to use Stathead, just shoot us an email. We're support@stathead.com, and we will be happy to answer any question you have, walk you through any issue you might have using the site. No matter how simple it is, we would love to help show it to you. We have a bunch of social media accounts that you can follow too. We're on Twitter @Stathead. We have a Stathead Facebook page. And we also have all of the Pro Football Reference Twitter, Pro Football Reference Facebook page. One other thing I'll plug is our YouTube. If you go to the Sports Reference YouTube page, we have a bunch of tutorials on how to use different Stathead tools. So you can watch, it's a quick 1 or 2 minute video for each tool that just quickly shows you, hey, here's what this tool is, here's how you can do. We're rolling them all out, so there'll constantly be more being added to them, but that's another really good resource if you want to use Stathead. So thanks so much for coming tonight and for asking so many great questions. And I hope that this has you excited for the draft and excited to use Stathead to follow along and see what happens. So thank you again. Have a great evening and best of luck to your team or your favorite players tomorrow. I can't wait. The draft is super fun, and I think this year is going to be crazy. So thanks again, and have a good evening.